I'm Dennis Anderson along with Julie Zenner. Here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
A recent Supreme Court decision on campaign financing has reopened debate on money in politics. The fallout from the ruling could be felt all the way down to the city and county levels.
It was a busy week at the state capitol as lawmakers worked to pass major bills before leaving for their spring recess.
And we'll have the week's top business updates and a news file story from 25 years ago.
It's all up next on Almanac North. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thanks very much for watching. Julie, this was certainly the warmest week of the year so far.
So far, but I feel like summer is coming.
Yeah, temperatures in the mid-50s. Not bad though, huh? Feels pretty good.
It does
All right,
feel
we've
good.
got some great guests tonight too, so let's get started.
All right. Thank you, Denny. Welcome, everyone. In a ruling last week, the United States Supreme Court struck down overall limits on corporate campaign contributions spent to influence elections. The ruling could have a trickle-down effect in Minnesota, where some are now questioning the state's campaign financing rules. Our guests are here to talk about the influence of big money in politics. Neill Atkins is a former Duluth City Councilor and radio talk show host. And Gloria Toivola is now retired from her position as a political science professor at UWS. And thanks to both of you for coming in.
Well, thanks for asking.
Gloria, what's wrong with allowing unlimited corporate and individual campaign contributions to candidates?
Well, you know, we go back to Buckley versus Vallejo when they said money was speech. And when you allow an unlimited amount of money into these campaigns, then in a sense you're giving an advantage to those who have more funds to donate. So I always used to say that I couldn't afford as much free speech as some of them.
Neill, what do you think about the Supreme Court decision?
Well, I get concerned when billionaires or large nonprofit organizations that have billions at their access, incorporated, can go out and throw money at candidates and affect elections. I don't like the idea of unlimited funds. I know if somebody has personal wealth, they've been able to go out and spend their own money if they wish, and we see that happen in campaigns. My troubling thing is sometimes whoever the PACs are, whatever they're being funded by, you really don't know at times who's really doing the money, and that concerns me.
Do either of you believe that maybe personal wealth should also be limited? Because some might think then you can buy your election?
Do you think that, are you saying that personal wealth should be limited or
Yes,
donation?
personal wealth limited. You're donating your own personal wealth to the campaign
as a donation,
yes.
yeah. I do think so. I think one of the upsetting things that occurred just recently was Edelman in Las Vegas and all these presidential candidates going there to basically kiss up to him because he has so much money to give. And he's concerned, of course, with a couple of issues. I mean, online gambling and Israel. And so, you know, they're having to agree with those positions.
Now, Minnesota does limit the amounts campaigns can raise from lobbyists and PACs and individual large contributors to, I believe it's 20%. Do you think if that's challenged now, given the Supreme Court decision, that it's going to be able to withstand a challenge?
I don't know. That's going to be up to the courts. I like to see reason and common sense used, and unfortunately in politics, those are two words that are generally missing. But the problem that I see, having been through a dozen campaigns myself, between running for various offices and being limited. I mean, on the local level, for city government and school district, you are extremely limited on how much people can give. But there's no limit on how much PACs can go out and buy advertising. And whoever the PAC may be, whether it's representing organized labor or businesses or what have you, and they can dramatically affect elections, especially if you have lower voter turnouts.
Maybe you can both answer this particular question. Does the cost of campaigning limit potentially good candidates or keep them from running?
Oh, absolutely. You don't have to have the money yourself, but you certainly have to have access to it. And that's difficult, if you don't know those kinds of people. And so I think that's another way in which democracy is really compromised.
What do you think,
in this
Neill?
whole process.
Well, I don't like to see these huge amounts of money, but I look at campaigns where the money didn't matter. I look at when Paul Wellstone beat Rudy Boschwitz. Boschwitz was extremely well funded, and Wellstone had a shoestring budget, and he ran an extremely effective campaign and won the day. And I look out in Huffington, out in California. His wife was a billionaire, and he ran, threw all his money on it, and was defeated. And you see races like that where the candidate, no matter how much money some people are going to throw at it, if you don't sell yourself to the public, and the public doesn't perceive you as a good candidate, you're not going to win. So, but the danger is, especially in the last presidential elections, these I don't know, was it $1 billion?
I think it was $1 billion
Yeah,
each
$1 billion.
that they raised.
It was spent, and it certainly helped employ some people in advertising agencies and did some good there. But it seems like an awful lot of money to throw around, and I think it gives the public a real bad feeling that they're zeroed out.
Does that make, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that I think that the public's way around this is to look at how some of that money is spent. And like in the last presidential election, they spent about equal amounts. Some of the studies have shown that the effect of those campaign ads was short-lived. So the ones that were truly effective were like the day before the election. But the voters can sit there and say, okay, this is an ad. Who is behind this candidate? What kinds of groups are spending money on it? Are these groups that I really agree with? There are problems, however, with some of the court cases in that you don't get the names of the donors if it's a 501c4 group. They don't have to release the names of the donors. But I think if we could get more openness in terms of who is donating the money, and in terms of what interests they were associated with. Sometimes you hear the name of a president of a company and it's not familiar to you, but if you hear that it's a big oil company.
It almost sounds like it comes down and sometimes to money and personality. Where does personality play a role in politics? If you're likable, you seem to win, right?
Well, depending. There are people, two candidates that are likable, and whoever gets the biggest pizzazz there factor with the public ends up winning, and maybe the tipping side is that extra money that's thrown in to get that candidate in. Because, as we see, it's charisma. Certainly we've seen people that have won. I think President Obama, part of his deal was he was a very charismatic man compared to his two opponents. And I look at Bill Clinton when he ran. He was very charismatic compared to going up against George Bush and Bob Dole. Mm-hmm. So, there you have somebody that has the charisma and can carry the day.
Well, I think, though, that personality isn't always the case. I think of Congressman Obie. I worked across the bridge a long time, and Congressman Obie could be downright cantankerous. And yet he was respected as one of the most intelligent members of the House of Representatives. And I think that's one of the things that people admired about him. So there are exceptions to that. And then you never know what someone's real personality is.
Sure.
Well, sometimes you find out, unfortunately, with some of the scandals that we were talking about off the air, you see these people that picture themselves, whether it's through the campaign or whatever, and then you find out awful things about, some of the scandals. And both parties have equal fodder, to say the least. I mean, we saw what happened with Anthony Weiner, and there were enough Republicans that blew themselves up too.
Mm-hmm. Neill, you mentioned that $1 billion that each of the presidential candidates raised in the last campaign. Does that in any way make the case for maybe publicly funded campaigns, or has it reached a point where, at least at the presidential level, that's not even possible because so much money is needed?
Well, the problem that I see with totally publicly funding campaigns is that I think it gives the incumbent the edge. So you have a challenger out there, and if each of you have a pot of $2 million that you can spend on campaigns, the incumbent who's been in for 30 years, let's say, the challenger is not going to have much of a chance. So I don't know if you want to limit it. I know in Minnesota you can accept public funds. In doing so, you do have to limit other contributions. There's a limit on how much more you can raise if you accept public monies, and some candidates don't.
What about just the phenomenon that we've seen over the past several years where, you know, the presidential campaign for 2016 is already pretty much starting now. You know, it used to be very compressed, and now it almost gets started as soon as one president is elected. Is that part of the problem too?
Well, I think it's part of the problem. The money raising starts at that point too. I wish they would spend a little more time thinking about governing than starting the campaign. But it seems as though if they start too late, if they start behind other candidates, they can be at a disadvantage.
One of the criticisms is we seem today to have more of a professional government rather than a group of people who come into, you know, they run 1 or 2 terms, they go back home again to be a school teacher or a dentist. Should we have term limits? The president can only have 2 terms.
Yeah, I think that would not be good. For one thing, what you find is that the staff members stay even when you have term limits. The lobbyists stay when you have term limits. And so the power, instead of being in the elected people, goes to the lobbyists and the staffers. And I think that's a real problem. And the staffers, of course, are really not accountable to the public.
I don't like term limits. I understand in the presidency when we ran into it when Franklin Roosevelt was president because of his health issues. The problem that I have with term limits, and I will disagree with some of the people that are some of my dearest friends on that, is that if we have somebody that's really good that's been in there and that's been in 2 terms, or in the House of Representatives, they're 2-year terms, U.S. Senate's 6 years, there's some people that are good. I have more confidence in the people that vote, that once they see him as a scoundrel, they boot him out. And if somebody's doing a darn good job, whether a Republican or Democrat, I say keep them until they decide to retire or what have you. But more on the local level, I don't like an idea of the Minnesota State Legislature going full-time. I think it works well the way it is, where most of the legislators have other interests and jobs. Congress in the old days when everything got started, you know, they went there for a month or 2 and they went back and plowed the fields and then they came back again. In the world of today, it just doesn't work that way. We're a huge, huge government, and you've got to have somebody minding the store, and I think that's where we're at.
All right, well, we don't view you as a scoundrel, but we're going to boot you out. We have to get on to our next one.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, let's dig into our news file archive for a look at what was making news 25 years ago this week.
The Lake Superior Center will lack very little. It will have above-water exhibits for loons, below-water aquariums for Lake Superior fish, even a stream and a working model of a submarine. What the project does not have is money. The Bayfront Development Association hopes to get $5 million for the city of Duluth, but the mayor isn't sure where the cash would come from.
We don't have an announcement yet to make today, but I do want to indicate that from my perspective, I think the city of Duluth needs to make a commitment.
The organization is also certain it can raise some money from private charities, but the bulk of the cash, $10 million, will have to come from the Minnesota legislature.
It is going to be hard because we still need more funds for the zoo. We need monies for EMB. The dredging you mentioned this year. But we're going to present all these proposals, and hopefully if we've got a bonding bill next year of $400 million, that we will be able to get our share of those funds from St. Paul.
Project planners say it's not easy to raise that kind of money, but they're confident they will, because the project has one of the world's best selling points right in its backyard. John Schottel, KDLH News.
Minnesota lawmakers wrapped up a busy week of work Thursday and headed home to their districts for a spring break. Increasing the state's minimum wage topped the list of bills passed before Thursday's adjournment, an issue that broke down strictly along party lines. Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton will sign the bill into law on Monday. Joining us now with the latest from the state capitol is Representative Jason Metsa, a Democrat from Virginia. Thanks for being here, Jason. You are an avid supporter of increasing the minimum wage. Why so?
Well, I believe, overall, the state I grew up in takes care of people, and wages have been increased in quite a while. And for me, it was more setting a standard of living for people who are on the low-income earning level, and having that standard be adequate to pay your bills when you go home after work.
Is there any fear in your mind that raising the minimum wage could close some businesses in the state?
I think overall, with any law, there's going to be negative and positive things that happen. And I think in particular with minimum wage, with a projected nearly $500 million in increased spending power, I don't see that as a bad thing or negatively impacting, especially in my district where you have a Walmart, a Target, on some of your mom and pop businesses on Main Street, I think are the ones we're talking about that might have a hard time with it. And I see the income earners from those larger box stores actually going back out into their community with a few extra dollars in their pocket every week, and maybe they go have that sandwich or go out to eat twice a month versus once, and that'll make a huge difference.
And there are actually some provisions for small businesses included in the bill, aren't there?
Yeah, and actually those are some of the ones that I carried was the federal conformity language. So we switched from businesses at 625,000 was the current level and brought it to the federal conformity level of 500,000. And then the wages end up at 775 versus 950. Which should be a significant difference for those small employers.
Jason, there are accusations then, I want to get this right, that backroom politics between House and Senate leadership resulted in the minimum wage package in exchange for a new Senate office building. Representative Pat Garofalo called the deal, and I'm going to quote, disgraceful, a bargain among thieves. How do you react to that?
Well, for those of you who know the politicians down at the Capitol, Phyllis Kahn passed the smoking ban years ago, so those smoke-filled rooms just don't exist down there anymore. And overall, there's a lot of things in a deal-making process, and it's more so getting an agenda set, and you've got over 1,000 bills that are in there. I'm sure minimum wage was discussed, along with many other things. I think the idea that it was traded one thing for another.
So you don't think the minimum wage bill held the Senate office building hostage?
No, I think it was more so, we had worked very hard for a year in the House. We passed it at 10:55 last year and spent a whole summer campaigning around it. And my day job I go back to, kind of like you were talking in your previous segment about going back to plow the fields, I come back and work in the district. And
$77 million though for that new Senate office building.
Yep.
Have you got the money? Where do you get it?
We had a really good year this year, or over the past few years, I should say. We've been recovering, and we need to make investments now. And a lot of people are talking about this is for the senators. And, there's a lot more employees that work at the Capitol than senators. Mm-hmm. So I think the big thing is, as we were talking to, there's new technology we put in these buildings and a lot of the changes and renovations getting done at the Capitol, and it's taking advantage of potentially bonding for things while the money's inexpensive to borrow and making wise investments. And I think that's what this is.
Were you surprised at the resistance to the Senate office building, though?
The historical standoff between the House and the Senate on almost every issue you can imagine is there. So I wasn't surprised, with that at all. No.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the Women's Economic Security Act, which passed in the House. Something that you're in favor of?
I thought it was great. I have a lot of aunties on my mother's side of the family who I'm sure most of which are very happy with some of the changes we made. And, I've got to give a shout out to Representative Moline, who actually, great job, Carly. You have a bill that had 11 different authors moving through a bunch of different committees and then kind of all ended up in one in our Jobs Committee.
Can you give us two or three of its main provisions?
Yeah, I would say I actually brought it here because there's so many bills and all
there
the
are
details. So I brought a few notes in. We're going to expand the unpaid sick leave, and That's great for families looking for the 6 weeks they would normally have going to 12. We are putting in workplace protections for working mothers. Breastfeeding is something that needs to get done. It is a lot harder to do if you have your child at work, and so we put in some protections there. We're requiring with businesses with more than 50 employees seeking the state contracts over 500,000 to ensure compliance with existing equal pay laws. So I think overall, there's a multitude of things, and if you dig in, I can leave you the House file numbers here, maybe to put across the bottom of the screen. Each of these bills has some really good things that go along with it. So
now, there were some critics who argued that a bill like this actually sets the women's movement back to a certain extent, because it implies that women can't take care of themselves out in the workplace without the government coming in and saving the day and, being the knight in shining armor. Do you see any truth in that?
I think, again, any law that you work on has its pros and cons, and I think this one had way more pros than cons. We've had typically male-led legislature for long before I got in here. A majority of people serving in public office were males, and I think you see the consequences of that when we're going back and correcting some of these things. So I think empowering women is something we need to do. I lost my mom when I was young, and she was a great mother, and want to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to have some equal footing in the workplace. Especially Representative Moline brought up a great point on the floor, which was pregnant mothers or mothers who had just had babies might get passed up for a job opportunity because they think, oh, she just had a child, she's not interested. And really, those are the kinds of things we need to look out for.
The anti-bullying law, your opinion?
I think it was good to set a state standard for that. There's a lot of problems with bullying. We've seen a lot of school shootings, and was everything in the bill perfect for everyone? Absolutely not. But overall, I think we took a step in the right direction and invested some state resources in making sure that kids felt free to go in and talk to their principals, their parents, and gave the school districts the tools they needed to work on this. I know there were already a lot of independent, policies in place from district to district, and this is kind of just a broad sweeping brush saying, here's kind of the standard we want to set and see kept.
And the resources are there then from the state to help the school districts implement this?
Yeah, we've increased funding both last year and this year. I think our schools have seen a very, very significant increase in comparison to
What will that
previous
funding
legislators.
include? Security or what? What will that include?
No, not so much security. I think it'll be each district has its own unique challenges to balance the books, and so I think it'll be different for every district moving forward, using whatever resources they have and allocating. Some of these districts might have, say, counselors in place right now that are already on staff. Other districts might look at bringing on a counselor and kind of restoring that role in our schools.
It isn't monies that school districts can say, well, we really don't need that kind of funding, but let's shift the money over in this direction? They can't do that?
No, it would be more the districts, it's more so the policy that they would have to enforce. And so the funding would come, I believe, from their general fund for a majority of the costs, and making sure that they were just keeping things in place. And again, many of these districts had their own policies in place. We just kind of set a bar on a state level saying, here's what we want you to achieve.
Medical marijuana. Coming back up for a vote, perhaps?
It's been one of those roller coaster bills, and Representative Moline, again, worked very hard on that bill, and across the aisle with Representative Garofalo, who you had mentioned. And so I really hope it does come up. I think it's something that is a common sense vote to take for us. It's something that's trending nationally. And overall, when you look at the benefits of using any type of medicine, one of the things that we need to send flares up every once in a while, and I'll use GMO labeling as an example, to the federal government. Each state kind of has its own sovereignty in many regards, and a federal law could stop you from doing something you thought was right. Sure. And so we need to send up flares every once in a while saying, hey, I think you should have a national discussion about changing some of this.
Representative Jason Metsa, thank you very much. Appreciate you
you
being here tonight. Thank you.
You always do such a nice. Well, it's time now for the week's business news from Business North. As mentioned earlier in the show, a compromise deal reached by Minnesota House and Senate DFLers this week will raise the state's minimum wage to $9.50 per hour by the year 2016. The compromise plan also ties the state's minimum wage to the inflation index up to 2.5%, while the wage hike would be fully implemented for most large employers by 2016. The compromise provides exemption for small businesses. Bill Blazer, Senior Vice President for the Minnesota Chamber, predicted the changes would disproportionately affect small businesses, border communities, young people, and entry-level workers.
Wisconsin lawmakers sponsored legislation recently that relieves a Superior Company from buying a security bond required to obtain a solid waste permit. State Senator Bob Joke and State Representatives Nick Milroy and Janet Bewley said their bill spares the Stella Jones wood chipping plant from paying $40,000 a year for the bond. They said their measure eliminates a costly financial burden while maintaining Wisconsin's regulatory system. During 2013, the Quebec-based corporation had $970 million in sales and $92 million in profits.
The Iron Mining Association of Minnesota is raising awareness about iron products through a new publicity campaign in the Twin Cities. The Hiawatha Rapid Transit Line tram has been painted to show the image of an ox and cart. The message is this: neither the trams nor the rails on which they run would exist without iron mining. People are forgetting that many products they use daily exist only because of iron mining, said Association President Craig Pagel. The campaign will continue through spring and summer. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
Now, if you have a comment about the show, call now. Dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message or send an email to Almanac North at WDSC.org. And don't forget to visit the WDSC website for the latest on your favorite PBS programs, news, and special events at the station. So, Julie, with spring showers in the forecast, spring flowers can't be far behind.
That's right, the Mayflowers.
Mayflowers.
And the Pilgrims.
Well, so we brought pilgrims to the Northland, huh? All right, well, summertime is on the way. For Julie and the crew at Almanac North, I'm Dennis Anderson. Have a great weekend. Good night, everybody, and be kind.